Welcome everyone. We are here just a little bit early, but that's okay. Just a minute early.
People you're watching.
Yeah.
Yay.
I'm Asia.
And I'm Molly.
And we are joined here today with such an incredible guest. Her name is Sadeqa Johnson. She's the author of Yellow Wife. I got the opportunity to speak with her the other day, and I'm just so excited to have this conversation with you and to just like to have you here. And yeah, welcome. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here. I feel like this has been in the making for like, I don't know, weeks at this point, right? You guys?
Yeah, we try to try to plan this a little bit. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
It's true.
But
I'm glad it worked today. I'm glad it worked today.
It worked, and we got Facebook to work with Zoom, which it hasn't been doing lately. So it's super exciting. So Sadeqa, can you just share a little bit about who you are and your book and what it is like, and just what drew you to this group?
Okay. Well, as you mentioned, my name is Sadeqa Johnson. I'm the author of the novel Yellow Wife. And Yellow Wife is historical fiction. It's my first historical fiction novel. It's the story of a 17-year-old mulatto girl who lives in Charles City, Virginia on a plantation. She's the daughter of the master of the plantation, along with his favorite slave, Ruth, who is the medicine woman and seamstress. Well, Phoebe has lived somewhat of a sheltered life. The master's sister did not have children. She never married. And so she takes Phoebe on kind of as a pet. And so she teaches her to read and to write and to play piano. And being the only child of the master, she has been promised freedom for her 18th birthday. It's something that she has always known. Her mother has drilled it into her. Well, the master takes a wife. And unbeknownst to Phoebe, this promise does not come to fruition. Instead, she is thrust into the bowels of slavery, which she finds herself in Richmond at the Lapeer Jail, which is a holding center and punishing center for enslaved people. There she catches the eye of the jailer who wants to make her mistress of the plantation, of the jail. And she really finds herself in some very sticky situations. So she has to outwit him and sacrifice on a daily basis, not only for herself, but for the people that she cares for. And it was a story that I discovered by accident. It was inspired by the real life story of Mary Lumpkin, who was a woman who lived in a jail here in Richmond. I live right outside of Richmond, Virginia. And I was on the Richmond slave trail with my family and discovered Mary Lumpkin's story. Basically, she was married to the owner of the jail. His name was Robert Lumpkin. It was actually the Lumpkins jail. And between 1844 and 1865, over 200,000 enslaved people passed through this jail. And it was well known because the owner of the jail, he was known as the bully trader. He was also referred to as the devil. The jail was called the Devil's Half Acre because he was so mean and so vindictive. So much so that if there was a nearby master who wanted to make an example of his slave, he would send them to the Lumpkins jail for punishment. And so families were separated, people were beaten. It was just a horrific situation. And when I learned the story, I couldn't stop wondering what life was like for Mary, because in our history, women like her have been blotted from the history books, And so I felt this connection of needing to know more about her and needing to know more about what it was like for her raising those 5 children in these horrific situations, in this circumstance.
Wow.
It's so, it's so intense because I remember when we were talking, you were talking about how, in like your kids and even like for me growing up, Black history is Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Jackie Robinson, and like that's it.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate that you took this and brought this story to life. And can you just share a little bit more about like what kind of inspired you to to focus on this?
Yeah, it was important for me. You know, all of the books that I write are about women, strong women who have something that they have to overcome, right? And when I was doing the research on women like Mary Lumpkin, because unfortunately, when I was researching her, there wasn't a lot about her, right? So I had to use a lot of imagination and then piece together other women's stories. And so what I found was that in Richmond, jails like the Lumpkins jail, which is my story is inspired by, there were a few of those in downtown Richmond, and it was very common practice. Richmond was number 2 in slave trading behind New Orleans. And so it was a huge industry here. The men who ran these jails, who were the traders, they were looked at as the pariahs of society because, you know, even though everyone had a slave, people didn't, you know, it was a dirty business. And so they were not able to marry well-off white women. And so there was this whole community of white men who were married to mulatto women and had their families with them. And so Mary Lumpkin was just one of them. Another was Karina Hinton, who I also write about in Yellow Wife. And I use her actual name as a way to pay homage. And so I found these women, you know, through history. And I thought, you know, I felt charged, you know, actually to bring their stories to life, because I think for our children in particularly, history is a little bit boring, right? Like they don't want to read a textbook. But if I could take these real life stories and create fiction around it and still give you sort of that same story, I think that it'll land better. And so that's what I hope I was able to do with Yellow Wife.
Yeah, and I know we spoke before we started this, and we said, you know, when we read off people's bios, people don't really listen, bios and accolades. And just so you all know, the reviews for this book are really incredible, from the Washington Post, NPR, Publishers Weekly, Philadelphia Inquirer. You know, it's just so incredible to have you here. And also people are saying in the comments who have read it, like, this is the most amazing book ever. It's such a page. Like, yeah. So I know in general, when we read lengthy bios and accolades and reviews, people don't. But it's really impressive and really amazing. This is a New York Times. This was a bestseller. I forget, maybe not New York Times, but it's a bestseller.
It was a Globe and Mail international bestseller. So it made the Canadian version of the New York Times, right? So I had to start somewhere. So I'll bring it down here, and I'll do the New York Times maybe for the paperback book. You know, we got to make our rounds.
Yeah, it's amazing. And when did this come out?
It came out January 12th, so it's still a baby. You know, I feel like I have a little infant in my arms, you know, that I'm raising up every day.
Yeah, it needs to learn to walk to get here from Canada, right? That's it. Just needs to walk down. That's amazing. No, it's so great, and I personally, full disclosure, I have not yet read it. I'm very excited to read it. Suze, who spoke with you and booked this, she was like, we have to talk to her. Yeah. Like, if she'll talk to us, this will be amazing. So it's just really, really incredible to have you. And you're right, you know, history books are sort of like, you read it and you're like, this woman who lived and it's like, you want to engage with the story, and you want to see the humanity of history. And that sounds like what you've really accomplished. So it's awesome. Yeah.
And you know what I love? I love the focus on women, right? And Black women. You know, as we were talking yesterday, we were talking about the importance of resilience, right? And like the ability to share a story and have that come through, and it's not just like a singular character who has now become like almost like a goddess or monolith in our minds, right? Because I think about like what you hear, like the legends like of Harriet Tubman, right? And it's like, okay, great. And there's like, it makes it feel like there's nobody else who's ever like her in history, right? That it's like, it becomes untouchable. And at the same time, like when you can share and tell a story like this, I feel like it's like, oh, we get to see ourselves in that.
And that's always my aim. Even before I was writing historical fiction, which I've written 4 books. So this is my very first historical fiction, but that's always been my aim, is that I want people to be able to see themselves in the story. You know, I want you to be able to identify. I want people to not feel alone. The novel that I wrote prior to Yellow Wife is called And Then There Was Me. And it was about a woman who had an eating disorder. Particularly for me in the Black community, I don't feel that eating disorders is something that we discuss, that we see as a problem in our community. And so I know that it exists, right? I know that there are women who go through it. And so it was important for me to write a character that people could identify with. And another one of my novels, in Second House from the Corner, I write about a woman who was basically she was a predator to an older man. Now, that happens. You know, she was 15 and he was grown, and he was coming after her in a relationship. And, you know, while that was not my experience, it was something that I saw and I heard growing up, that, you know, 15-year-old girls dating 30-year-old men and having them pick them up from school and giving them money and things like that to make them feel like a woman. It happens. And so it was important for me to write about that. You know, in my first novel, the woman, her mother was an alcoholic. And, you know, I know that that is a painful history. People don't want to talk about it. You just stuff it down, you feel it, but you don't talk about it. And so when I write, my aim is always to shed a light on something that you may have been feeling or you may have wanted to know, but you haven't been able to really fully let it materialize and kind of bring it to light. And so, you know, when Yellow Wife came to me, when I was walking on the Richmond slave trail, we had ended the walk at the sacred African burial ground. And there's this big grassy area in Richmond. So when the slaves died at the Lumpkins jail, there was no ceremony for them. Probably nowhere there was a ceremony. They literally just waited for the bodies to pile up and they shoved them in the ground. And so they've carved this area out. And as we were there, I could feel the energy. I could feel the energy of the ancestors. And, you know, it was this strong feeling, and it was like they were waiting for us. You know, they were waiting for us. And then I thought, oh, maybe they were waiting for me. They want me to tell their story. And that just gave me the chills, you know. It's one of those things as a writer that I have to kind of be in tune to. And, you know, I feel charged that it was my job to bring people like Mary Lumpkin's story to life. Well, you know, in my fictional mind, I do write in a way where I feel that the spirits, they are speaking to me. I see myself as the conduit. I try and separate myself. I know that Elizabeth Gilbert one time says that if you separate yourself and don't focus on being the genius, but let the genius flow through you, then you have the real power to tell that story. And so that's what I tried to do with Yellow Wife, was just let the ancestors speak and the stories flow through me. There's some difficult scenes in the book. I'm going to give you a warning. There are, but I thought that they were necessary because it happened. Right. And for me, I like to write as close to the truth as possible, because my thought was, if our ancestors could go through it, the very least I could do is write about it. And as readers, even if it's difficult, the very least you can do is share in that experience.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. I feel it's so powerful, right? Because one of the thing that we talk about in this group is, you know, having conversations, right? Saying the thing that you're afraid to say, or the question that you're afraid to ask, or because at the end of the day, I think like it's that thing that builds up that wall between us, right? It's like
we're just talking about this.
That keeps us separated, right? It's like this thing that goes unsaid, that just you're supposed to like push down and ignore or like gloss over, and then it builds up. It's like a brick and a brick every time. Like, you don't want to talk about eating disorders? Okay, let me like bury that brick. You don't want to talk about alcoholism? Okay, we'll bury that brick. And pretty soon we have this wall between each other of stuff that we're not talking about, and everybody's pretending isn't there. And then we expect to create a world that actually works, and we wonder why it doesn't work.
When you say it like that, when you
Yes. Well said. Well
said.
said.
Of course, it doesn't work. Yeah.
And it's just like, it's one of those things you're just like, oh, and that's why I love like what you're bringing forth, right? And like telling the stories of the ancestors and listening to that kind of gut feeling, that gut like that, like to let things come through. And I think that's just it's something that we all have, but it's something that we're for the most part told to ignore, right? Told to like discount. And it's just fascinating. It really is just fascinating.
Well, and we talk a lot in this group too about how one of the challenges is that slavery in this country goes largely unacknowledged, right? And that's easy to do when you don't know the stories. But when you start to hear the stories and you start to read the book, we were talking earlier today about Anne Frank and the Holocaust and sharing those stories and reading these books. And it's like, now there's a book that shows this part of history as well. That's a story. You get to know the person, and when you get to know someone and you learn through, there's like studies that tell you that stories are good for learning, so it's like, I'm sort of like, this would be cool to be assigned this book in school.
Yes, I would love that. And I have spoken to a few high school students, high school classrooms, and it has been really well received. And we've had amazing conversabut I have 3 children. I have 3 teenagers. Pray for me, please.
Got it.
But one of the things I tell them often is that every single thing that happens in this country goes back to slavery. Everything.
Yeah.
And so I was having a conversation with the author of The Prophets, which is another story of slavery by Robert Jones Jr. that you must pick up. It's amazing. And he said to me, Sadeqa, do you realize that the jail that you are writing about, that you wrote about in Yellow Wife, is very similar to mass incarceration of Blacks and brown people right now in this country? Like, your story took place in the 1800s, but right now in 2021, we are dealing with mass incarceration in the very same form. And, and so everything goes back to that time. And I also like to just make it known that this is our history. This is not just Black history.
Right.
Slavery is America's history. It is the principles in which this country was founded on. And so this is all of our story, right? So if we embrace it and really take the time to get to understand, the caste system and how things came about, it would make us integrating and conversating that much easier. And so this is an American story for sure.
Yeah.
I love, and that's so like just that like little tweak, right? In language, right? Just that little tweak of, it's not Black history, right? And that's the thing that like drives me nuts sometimes, because I'm like, okay, yeah, we have Black History Month, but like Black history is American history, as if it's something separate, and it just furthers the idea. And like and of course, like, it has never been put in like fully integrated. That's why you have to have Black History Month. But when you can tweak it and you just slightly, it's like, oh yeah, this is American history, this is our history. And then what does that make possible, right? Like, so much more becomes possible because we get to look at it. Right? Like, we get to look at it.
And we can unpack it in a way that we're not separated from it, right? So if we're all seeing this is our shared history, when we start to have the conversations and we start to unpack it, it's more inclusive as opposed to exclusive.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're up to, right? Like, we're creating a world where racism cannot exist, right? That is like hands down what we're doing. Not that it doesn't exist, that it cannot exist, which means that we have the conditions where it's not even
connection
fathomable, right? And so what does that look like? It looks like these deep connections, right? It looks like you and I, like, we're not separated. It's like, my pain is your pain, my joy is your joy, and vice versa. And I think that this is so important, because when we look at our history as if it's a shared history, then we have a foundation for creating a shared future, co-creating it together. As opposed to being like, oh, this is the future, then white people hit a future versus and black people future, like it's got to be different. It can't be.
Oh, this is so cool. Claudia says, by reading her book, slavery became part of my history. I was able to integrate.
I love it.
It's so interesting.
There's so many stories and that's the thing that really I learned as I was writing Yellow Wife is that, I mean, this is just one story. This is one person's experience, right? And my editor just sent me a book that's coming out in 2022 called Yonder. And it was about slavery, and it was completely and utterly different than Yellow Wife. Like, I think I was telling you, Asia, I almost didn't want to pick it up because I thought, oh my gosh, I just spent 3 years reading these very difficult and heavy books about this, deep, dark part of our history. And I opened it and it was magical and it was different and it was fresh and it was beautiful. And it gave me so much hope. And so there's so many different stories to tell, for this portion of history. Even as I was researching it, I had to be really careful to hold back from jumping down the rabbit hole because, slavery in Virginia, which was my concentration, would lead me to Charleston, would lead me to Maryland, would lead me to Philadelphia. And I had to say, no, stay focused because there's so many threads to this tapestry.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know. I just think about a lot, like I think about like the possibility that we can have when we actually acknowledge, because we talk about this on like acknowledge slavery for what it was, right? Instead of glossing over it, instead of just being like,
it's over now.
It's over now.
It's over now.
There's no impact, like we're all done with it. Like, no, we're not. Like you were just mentioning, like it's the same, like jail from 1800 is the same thing that's happening today. And like what shifted, right? And I think that's why like stories like this are so important, because then it tells a story and you don't forget it, right? You don't, it becomes a part of you. Like Claudia said, like you integrate it, and it's not this like separate, like disconnected dissonance thing where you're just like, that was then, those people, there's no relation, and now we're here and there's no connection, right? It's just like, it feels like the way in which we engage with it now is like magic, right? There's so much you have to ignore in order for people to be like the way that we are about slavery, many people are about slavery, it's like magic. It's like poof, oh, we just got here. Like, no, there's a whole history that led up to this point, but we don't, like, people aren't taught that. So then you get to make up in your mind, like, oh, this is what happened. And like you make up some version of it that makes it okay.
Yeah. I mean, and also just the fallout of it, of families being separated, of children who grew up without mothers. That was very heartbreaking for me as I was doing my research because, as a mother, I can't imagine being somewhere and my child is just being ripped away from me and then I'm supposed to go back as if that child didn't exist, And so just seeing the effects that slavery has had on the institution of families, from there till now, even. I mean, when I think about my family tree, I have a cousin who, on my mother's side, has done some work to really be able to trace our ancestors back into the 1700s. But when I look at my father's side, I have to just think memory. Like, what did my grandmother tell me when I was younger? I remember doing a bit of a family tree. And what did she say? My grandmother isn't here anymore. And so trying to figure out like how far we go back, people say, where are you from? And I'm like, well, I grew up in Philadelphia, but where am I from? Right? Like, where am I from? Where are my people from? And it's unfortunate that we cannot always definitively answer that question. And that is a fallout of slavery. And when you're displaced, you behave in a way, you don't have that roots, you don't have that thing to tie you down. And so that's something that, we don't talk about a lot.
No. I know. It's so true. It's like, where are you from? I remember being in school and kids were like, there was some like grade school, and kids would, there was some exercise, and people had to like trace their family tree and like figure out where your, like find out where your family came from. And I was like, I could go back as far as my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's it. And all the other kids could go like
sharecropper.
Yeah. And yeah, he was a sharecropper in Florida. And like that's it. You know, and like there's some like rumor about my great grandfather, my mother's side, who was maybe like Native American and something else, but like no one knows the story. Like no one has like the real thing, like the real deal. And I remember my classmates being like, "Oh,
the Mayflower.
Yeah, my ancestors came over on the Mayflower.
The Mayflower.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
And it's like, oh, and they came from wherever they came from,
yeah,
someplace.
Scotland.
Scotland. Yeah.
And this is their name, and this is their family crest, and you can visit Scotland today and see where they were. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we miss all of that. We've missed all of that, you know, and it's unfortunate. I know my own kids, people say things like, what are you mixed with? I mean, that's another common thing that comes up for Black people. If you look a certain way, it's like, what are you mixed with? And they're like, well, my mom and my dad.
Yeah, I get that a lot, and as far as I know, I'm not mixed with anything. But I remember being like, because I grew up in the South for the most part, right, in North Carolina, and so people are just Black, right? It was like you're just Black, and then we moved to New York, and then there was all different kinds of Black people, and so then I realized oh, I'm just plain Black. I'm not Black Dominican. I'm not from Guyana. I'm not.
I had the same experience, Asia. I went to college in New York, and I grew up in Philadelphia. And in Philadelphia, it was Black, Filipino, Puerto Ricans, and whites. That was who I went to school with. And when I moved to New York, it's like, well, what are you? And I'm like, I'm Black, just Black, you know. they wanted, they're like, oh, you look Dominican, or there had to be something else to add to it, and I was like, yeah, no, just Philadelphia Black,
yeah. Black, just Black, yeah. And it's so interesting because it doesn't bother me, but I do recognize that there is something missing when there's no direct connection to the place where your people come from, right? There's no, I'm not my family isn't from even my friends who are from Jamaica, right, or the Caribbean, right? They have a different connection and sense of Blackness than we do, right? Because it's oh, you have a place where your people from. And slavery was different down there.
It was, yes. And there's a great book. I mean, if you're just really interested in this topic, there's a great book that's coming out either June or July. It's called Island Queen. It's by Vanessa Riley. And I read it, and it's all about a woman who grew up in the Caribbean, who was a slave, and how she became a millionaire. I mean, I'm saying, there are so many sides to this story. And that was one that really was quite riveting. So I would add that to my list as well.
Okay.
We're going to have a reading list.
We're going to have a whole reading list.
Troy just said, I just finished The Home Place last night by Professor Lanham. So good and apropos for exploring roots. So, yeah. It's been really interesting, too. I remember being with Asia in Kenya, and she had just done a DNA test and learned that she was Nigerian, Ghanaian. And they were like, you're Nigerian, you're with us, we were with a bunch of women from Nigeria. And it was this really interesting thing where it was oh yeah, so the DNA tests are an interesting element, I think, to figuring out where you're from. And I lived in Ghana for 2 years, and one of the cool things that is happening now is that repatriation, where they'll give you citizenship, you're from here, okay, it's such an interesting, it's interesting what I think.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember I went to Senegal in the late 90s, and I was so sad when it was time for me to leave. And I remember, and I went alone, like I went with a group, but I didn't have a friend. So I just decided I went with this group that was from NYU. I'm like, I'm going. I need to get to the motherland. And when it was time to leave, I felt so sad because I remember thinking, wow, I had lived my whole life African American and I understood my American side. And it was the first time I had been introduced to my African side. And I felt such a kinship, you know, and I didn't know, was I Senegalese? Was I Guyanese? I had no idea at that point, but I felt at home and I felt this kinship. And so it was such a sad moment to leave because it was like, wow, I had just discovered a piece of myself that had been taken from me and was trying to mesh it all back together to figure out like, well, who am I?
Yes, you know, I like when you went there, was it like a little bit of shock because like everybody's black?
Yeah, for sure.
Everybody's black.
Yes, and I went during Ramadan as well. And so that was a whole nother aspect to it because they couldn't understand like why I wasn't fasting. I'm like, well, you know, they were like, you're black. Like, why aren't you fasting with us? It's like, well, you know, but it was definitely a wonderful experience.
I know. I can't wait to like travel again.
I know.
Yes, I cannot. My 15-year-old daughter is going through it. She's like, when are we getting on a plane? When are we getting on an airplane? I'm like, I understand your restlessness, babe, but we have to just wait until it's safe.
I know.
We're getting there.
Yes, we are. We had talked with Asia's whole family about doing a trip to Ghana and visiting Cape Coast, and it's really, I remember visiting Cape Coast. For those of you who don't know, it's one of the castles, dungeons, more like. They're part. Yes, it's a slave castle. They call it a castle. It's part of the slave trade. And I remember being there and just being like, every American has to, like everybody, every American has to experience this, has to come here, has to see this, has to get it, you know. And for those of you who have not traveled a lot, it's not like you go to a place and there's like a lighted walkway and an exit sign and handrails. Like it's as it was, you know, and it's like the blocks that were there are still there. It's not like this cleaned up, prettied up, painted up place. And they open the door of no return, they call it. And there's just that now there are fishing boats, but they're like, this door opened and off they went. And it's just like, it's really, I mean, everybody should experience it. Everyone should see it. And I think by reading the story, like these stories, it's like, and then what happened? And then what happened before that? It's like you just start to get curious, and soon you start to experience this. It could be this amazing connection between continents, you know. And it's like, that is not what it is now.
Yeah, a book that does a really good job of describing how the Africans were captured, and it's fiction as well, is Homegoing by Ya Gahasi. Oh my goodness. When I was reading that book, I was like, golly, I wish I had written it. That's to me the ultimate compliment. If I'm reading a book and I'm like, I wish this was me.
Yeah, we'll have to.
But she does a good job of showing kind of that thread of like how it started and bringing them to America and how the families, you know, how it progressed. And so that's another good one to read as well.
Yeah. We'll add it to the list. See if we want to like put it in there.
Homegoing is a funeral in Ghana.
Yeah. You know, I think, you know, something that's really, and we kind of started talking about that yesterday. Oh, we have some questions, but like the idea that by sharing stories, like individual stories, you're creating an opportunity for people to see, not only like for us to see ourselves, but like especially for like other people to see, like not have Black people be a monolith, right? And having the same story over and over and over again about like who Black people are, which I think is like the cop out, right? I think it's like it's become this easy thing. It's like, oh, okay, like here's this box, you're Black, you fit right in it.
Yeah, the one story narrative, which is not true at all, but there is a single narrative of what it's like to be a Black person in America. And it's just not true. It's just not true. It's like, how many flowers, different types of flowers do you have in your backyard, you know? And that's how it is. It's like, how many different trees, how many species of birds do you have flying around your house? I see quite a few around my house. And so it's just the single narrative is just not true. And so we have to do what we can to open up the conversation so that, you know, we can shed some light on all of these different layers of Blackness.
And it's interesting because with white people, there's never an assumption there's a single story. It's like, no, of course there's not. No, everyone, we're very different. Like, what? But it's like, oh, but them over there, there's a single story. And I think about the single story growing up in New Hampshire was there used to be slavery, and then there was Harriet Tubman, and then everybody sang a song together, and they followed the drinking gourd, and they made their way north, and they were part of the Underground Railroad, and now they are very fortunate and free, and God bless America. Yep, Martin Luther King fixed it all. Yeah, because after everyone got here and everyone got immediately freed by just making it, you know, to the north, then what happened is some people were a little upset about it, just like a little bit, just some people.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. So Martin Luther King, I mean, but that's really, like, literally, I graduated from high school, and that is what I knew. That is real, and like I was a good student, you know, like it's not like I just didn't pay attention. I'm like, something about. It's like no, yeah, it's really interesting. So we have a few questions here. One person says, do you have any advice for aspiring authors? And does that advice differ if you are white or Black?
So no, because we're writers, so we're all writers, right? So writing is what we do. So my advice really is that keep your butt in the chair. And I say this all the time because the hardest part for me is to actually write. And that's writing without distractions, writing without checking my email, because I check my email like 75 times a day because I'm waiting for Michelle Obama to reach out to me. I'm waiting for Oprah, you know, so I have to be right there when I get that email. So I'm constantly checking, right? So you have to put the distractions aside. The first thing that one of my writing teachers told me was just start off with small increments of writing, 10 minutes before bed. If you write 10 minutes before bed, before you know it, it's 20 minutes. And then 20 minutes is 30 minutes. And in a few weeks' time, you'll have 50 pages in front of you. You don't just go to the gym, right, and pick up 50-pound weights your first time. You're going to hurt yourself. So don't just sit down and say, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to write 8 hours a day. You don't need to do that. You want to start with those 5-pound weights, and then you move up to 10 pounds. And so it's the same thing with writing. And so just start off with a small increment and just add on to it. That would be my biggest advice. The other thing is be sacred about and intentional about your writing time. Make sure that the people who you live with know that this is the time that I can't be disturbed. Unfortunately, with COVID, my time is always being disturbed now because I have teenagers here learning. So they think they can pop in any moment, and it's just one thing, Mom. I just got to say one thing, you know? So you wanna be intentional about carving that time out and making it sacred for yourself. And you know, when you get to the point where if you're writing, I'm assuming you're writing something long, if you're writing a full manuscript, I would say when you get to the point that you really think you're done and you want to submit it to publishing houses and that sort of thing, hire a professional editor. That is really the biggest advice I can give you. Not your grandmother, not your friend who was an English teacher. I mean, you could use them just as you're going through it. But when you are really ready for that submission, you want to have a professional look at it. And always remember, you only get one time to be a debut. So you want it to be as good as it can get. So make sure that you put the right people around you.
That's awesome.
There's someone who says she's going to apply this to her art portfolio.
That's right.
Claudia asked, in your book tour, did you notice any white defensiveness? So I guess you've done a virtual book tour too, right?
Yeah. So I've been on virtual book tours since January 12th. Like a lot of I've talked to a lot of people, which has been amazing. So COVID has helped me in that way because this virtual platform did not exist before. So with my other books, I would have went on the road for maybe 5 or 6 days, hit a couple bookstores, and then came back home. Where with this virtual platform, I'm reaching book clubs and Facebook Live groups and so many people. So it's been amazing. And the conversations have been wonderfully rewarding. I've not felt any tension. People, when I meet, and unfortunately, a lot of times I'm either meeting with Black people or I'm meeting with white people. There's not a lot of audiences when they're integrated. And I feel that when I am meeting specifically with some of the white audience, they're very curious. They want to have the conversation. They want to know more. They want to make sure they're not offending me and wanting to know more, but their minds are open and they're ready to be fed. And that has really been just wonderful for me. It really has.
That's awesome. Yeah. I know we have a few people who've said in the comments, like, are we going to start a book club?
Well, if you do, start with Yellow Wife.
Yeah, that's what they want to read in their book club. They're really, the people who have read it are saying about how incredible it is.
We can talk to Neo. Talk to Neo about the book club.
Yeah, he has a book club.
I know, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, this Facebook group has 41,000 people in it or something. So there are some very cool little offshoots that are happening.
Thanks to you both for doing such an amazing job of bringing this community together. I salute you for that.
Thanks. I mean, it was kind of an accident.
Yeah, we didn't mean to.
So we go live every single day with an action that people can take towards creating a world where racism cannot exist. And a lot of it is, educational. A lot of it is action oriented, like something that directly can do, somebody you can support. And then sometimes it's like this, right? Like having conversation with somebody that you would never otherwise know about.
Such a gift.
Right? Or something you might not otherwise hear about in a story you would have never heard. And I think that is really the key because, I think so much of what we're dealing with in our culture and country and really the world right now is that people just don't think, like they think that they're all alone, right? Like we've been living in our silos of this is the way the world should work. This is what I think. This is what my friends think. And this is how it is. And then we're running into each other, being our silos are running into each other. And you're like, oh, we can't agree on anything. And so it feels like there's so many different sides, or there's maybe one big side and another big side.
Yeah.
And I think what's so key about this is that I think this blurs those lines, right? Because there's not really a side in this story, right? I haven't read this book yet, but when you share the experience through a story of somebody, it's hard to be oh, well, I'm on this side and this side. It's oh no, we're going through this journey together. And we have this opportunity, this shared experience together. And so therefore, then we don't have to have the sides, because they're not real anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's all made up. It's all imagined. It's all boundaries that we put on ourselves. It's all boxes that have been put on us. None of it's real, really.
None of it's real.
A friend of ours says you can have boundaries or you can have connection. Yeah.
Oh gosh, it's so much.
It's not real anyway, says Colleen.
I know.
That's the good news, bad news. The good news is we made it all up. The bad news is we made this up.
I know.
We could have made up anything. We made this up. Come on. It's time to make up something new.
It is time to make up something new. And that's exactly what we're doing. Exactly what we're up to. Making up something new. And the key to that, I think, is really acknowledging what we have created already.
And we do that through stories.
Yeah.
The story is so important.
It's this is what we created. This is what an experience that someone went through. And we get to choose, right? Do we want to keep creating this story? Do we want to keep rewriting this story? Or do we want to create something new? Yeah. And I'm of the mind that we should create something new.
Yeah, how about 200 years from now, we're not reading The Yellow Wife or reading about the mass incarceration of 2021 and going, oh yeah, we still have that. Now we call it this.
Yes.
Oh yeah, we still have that. Now we call it this. Oh yeah, we still have slave patrol. Now we call it this. It's like, it's just, that I think has been one of the most enlightening things to me personally about, you know, having had a very limited understanding of history, basically, of the reality of the world, graduating from high school and learning along the way. It's been a little while since I was in high school, but really seeing that, like, as you said earlier, like, it is all still here. It is all still here. It's just a different name now. We just make it like a little bit more palatable. So,
Yeah.
oh, that's a little much, don't you think? Or, all right, we'll have a small bite then.
Yeah.
You know, but it's like, and the pendulum swings, right? Like, you know, it's like, yeah, it's really interesting. It goes from like bad to worse to bad, I think. Let's get a new clock.
Particularly.
Let's get a new clock. Yeah.
Well, is there anything, like, if there's like one big takeaway that you would have people leave with and that you want to share? And this is like kind of like a big question, but if there is, what would that be?
So I think in reading Yellow Wife, the biggest takeaway for me is that we stand on the shoulders of resilient people. More in particularly, we stand on the shoulders of resilient women. It is women who have pushed the needle. It is women who have sacrificed and bear the brunt of all of these moments in history. You know, it is women who could make a way out of no way. You know, when I think about women like Mary Lumpkin and Phoebe in my story, they lived in a world where they had to make life-changing decisions with no information on a daily basis. Yeah. And we come from strong ancestors. And so when I think about Mary Lumpkin and when I think about the character that I have created, it makes me feel like I can do anything. If they can overcome, slavery and losing their children and seeing families being separated and sleeping on dirt floors and not having much of anything, but still finding a way, still holding on to faith and belief, then I can do anything. And so the biggest thing is that we come from resilient people. And so we are capable of anything.
Awesome. I mean, that's like, yeah, like, I'm like, all right, drop the mic right there. It's so good because, like, I think, like, one of the things that we're not struggling, but, like, that comes up for people is this idea that, like, I'm not the one, right? Like, I can't do it. Who am I to speak up or say this or interject or put myself out there or make the change or make a claim that we're creating a world where racism cannot exist in our lifetime? Right? And, like, that's something that I think comes up, and, like, we're actively, like, rooting this out because that's like, okay, read this book, everybody, right? Like, we can, right? Like, we really can do anything, and we just live in a world where we're constantly told we can't, especially, I think, women, right? Because it's, like, the way in which, and then, like, Black women, like women of color, and you're like, oh, no, right? And then, but this is, like, that's why, like, it's so powerful, because it's like, oh, yeah, wait. We have resilience. We have this already in us. We can do anything. We can create this anew. So I love it. I'm so excited. Like, I'm gonna, like, is it on audiobook by chance?
It is, yes. And I have an amazing narrator. Her name is Robin Miles, and she does a really good job.
Okay, awesome. I'm gonna get it because I listen to my books like that.
Yeah, I just started listening to books, and let me tell you, it is life-changing for me because now I'm able to read faster. And I don't know if it's because I'm creating this new novel now, and so I need to, like, have story around me all the time. And so I'm listening to one book and I'm reading another book, and I think already this year I finished 12 books between the audio and the reading, which is really big for me because as a kid, I could read a book a day, right? Then life happens. I have children, I have all this stuff. And now I'm reading like a book a month. And so to be 12 books in May, I'm like patting myself on the back, but audiobooks has definitely given me a boost.
That's amazing.
Yes, that's a lot.
Oh, we'll have to get the
I'm a slow reader, like
yeah.
paper, so I'm like, it'll take me forever. But if I can listen to it, then I can just
speeds it right up.
I'm just going. It's great.
Yeah.
So,
I can't understand this. She's like, why not for you anymore? So great. This was so amazing, and it's so wonderful to meet you, and I cannot wait to read the book. Yes, when you start your book club, you all let us know. We are just not going to start it, but we will participate. There's a lot of ideas. When you have, and we would like to empower those of you in the group who would like to start a book group to start a book group. And if 40,000 people join, don't worry, you just keep showing up every day. Sadeqa says you keep your butt in the seat. That's what what we do. Yeah. We keep our butt in the seat
every day.
And we learn so much. Action creates clarity, and so it's just been, when we started this group, which was almost a year ago now, I don't know that I would have thought, in interviewing the author of a historical fiction book will be relevant to what we're up to. And it turns out it's like the foundation of what we're up to, in those stories and acknowledging all of that. So it's really just so incredible to meet you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you guys for having me. Thank you to your audience. It's so wonderful to have a platform like this. Please keep in touch. Yes, please keep in touch. You can visit my website at sadeqajohnson.net. You can follow me on Instagram. I'm at Sadeqa Says. Twitter at Sadeqa Says, and I am on Facebook. My Facebook page is Sadeqa Johnson. So let's keep in touch and keep the conversation going.
Yes,
I'm gonna follow you on Instagram. Yeah, we're new on Instagram. We're getting good.
Okay, good. I'm just getting started on Instagram. So if you guys have any tips, just let me know.
Keep your butt in the seat. That's the only tip. Yeah. We're gonna use your tip for everything, Sadeqa, and accept Molly and Asia as your follower. That's the other tip. So amazing. Thank you, Sue. Sue's put some links in we have the links to your book, your website, your Facebook, and Instagram as well. We had a bunch of people joining us today, and a lot of people catch the replay. So those of you catching the replay, share it. Yeah, make sure you share this with your community. Share this with your colleagues, everybody. And if you're a teacher, if you're a high school teacher, please, on behalf of a kid who went to high school, please, let this book be part of what you're learning, and let it be just part of the canon of literature that we learn from. So we have a lot of teachers in this group. So
awesome. Well, I speak to classrooms. I've done a few talks with high schoolers, and it's been absolutely amazing. The level of conversation, the questions that they ask, they're so hungry for something new. They are so hungry for something new. So I'm definitely available for those conversations.
And historical fiction is so great. So great. That way your students won't grow up saying they want their money back from high school like I always do. Even though it was free. All right. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.